All right, everybody, welcome to another Saturday discussion brought to you by Code Newbie, the place where everyone learns to code better. It doesn't matter whether you're, 2 days in, 2 years in, 2 decades in. I've seen everybody come and learn new things. Today we have a very special guest. We have Brian Douglas in the house. He is actually going to be leading us in Ruby API or learning to build APIs in Ruby, which is cool for me because I've always wanted to learn how to break into some APIs and maybe build my own for a few of my own projects. So the fact that he's doing it in Ruby is a little difficult for me because I don't come from that background. But at the same time, I definitely think I'm going to learn a lot from this. So without further ado, Brian, the floor is yours.
Cool. Thanks, Jay. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. So I've been a Ruby developer. Sorry, my son literally just sat on my lap right before we started. Oops.
That's
All
okay.
right,
He
buddy.
wants to learn too.
Yeah. So I've been doing Ruby for about 2 years. I am going to be basing. I'll go ahead and switch to sharing my screen for now. Yeah. There you go. I'm going to share my screen. So I'm basically just going to talk briefly about APIs first, because I know some people. Oops, sorry. All right, he's been taken away. So some people, I know a lot of people have started like with Python. Python's got a lot of similarities to Ruby, so you should be able to keep up as far as like the basics of coding. I'm not going to get into too much in depth of Rails or Ruby, but I'll just start with like basically writing an API in Ruby. So first, what's an API? I have my note here. Let me hide this. API is like it's the application program interface. So it's basically the way you would interact with other applications. So if you think like Twitter, if you had an app and you wanted to actually tweet from the app, tweet from Twitter within your app, you would use the Twitter API. So this gives you like let me just pull up the Twitter gem. Sorry, the Twitter API. The Twitter API gives you different methods that you can use to be able to have access to Twitter. So that's basically all it is. Almost every application could be an API with a couple steps if you weren't already going that way. But here, so if you want to look at tweets, Twitter, you can actually, once you get access to the API, you can access like contributors, you can access some, I guess, some geolocation data and stuff like that. So, and even like they're finding out like current user stuff and data. So Twitter's got a very big API. They've been working on that for a while. That was one of their goals in the beginning, is to take over that and be able to have that public-facing API. I think since they've kind of locked it down a bit, and we'll talk about that later. So right now, then I'm going to also answer the question like, why would you want to do an API over just doing a standard, Django or Rails app or just a standard HTML and CSS app? And basically, an API gives you the flexibility. So if you have an API that's written whatever language you want. So today I'm going to talk about Ruby, but whatever language that you choose, you'll have access to that. So if you want to use that same data for an app, for let's say it's like a to-do app, you can build an iOS app on top of the API. You can build a front-end JavaScript framework, and you can do all your HTML and CSS with that data, and it's all separate. So like with something like Rails, out of the box, if you were to start like a Rails app, you get all that mixed up and together. So all your HTML and your CSS and your data is all mixed up into that one repo. So with the API, you actually get to separate that, and you get the more flexibility to be able to use both ends. And we'll get more in detail to that. But that's it for my slides. I'm actually going to get into the live coding at this point now. So if you guys are following along on the video, you're following along live, if you go to that link, bit.ly/BrianAPI, it's actually going to take you to this blog post that I wrote, and this is what I'm going to be following along with for now. So here, basically, I'm just going to jump to all the code parts. There's some information I give on top of this that I'll talk to about, that I'll probably mention as I go through. But also, if you guys want to interrupt me and ask me any questions, like feel free to stop me. I'm not going to be, I guess I can jump back and forth. Actually, I probably won't jump back and forth to the chat, so I won't see it. So Jay, if you see a question that comes up in the chat, just give me a holler and I'll stop and talk. Um,
Can you put the link back up? I think we have a couple people that are wanting to look at the link.
yeah. So yeah, it's just bit.ly, and then it's Brian API. So I'll leave that up there. And I guess while that's up there, I'll just mention that I chose Rails only because for this blog post, because and also for this chat, because some of this functionality, if you're already a Rails person, some of this functionality is actually going to be built in to Rails 5. So if you have access to the Rails 5 beta, or actually you can, if you know how to do that, you can actually get access to that today. And you can actually do everything I've done in this blog post just with regular Rails. Today I'm going to use the Rails API gem. A Ruby gem is basically like a library of code to be able to have some extra functionality. Um, so I'm going to go ahead and just move on. So yeah, this is the blog post. I think I mentioned that. One thing to note, actually, let me just get started with the code, and then I'll start giving my tips as I go along. So if you have a Mac, or yeah, if you have a Mac, you already have Ruby installed, so you should be able to install gems if you already know how to do that. If not, just it's easy enough to Google that, and you'll get a Stack Overflow question. So I've got generators built in with my Rails API gem, so all I have to do is Rails API new. Normally in Rails, you just do Rails new, and then you generate your API or your project. So while that's going to go ahead and set my entire folder structure is actually going to be set up for me. You can do this manually, like with Node. Node has generators also, but you could actually do a lot of this manually in Node with a lot less work. Yeah, but for the sake of my Rails knowledge and my Ruby knowledge, I'll be using Ruby. I'm also going to open, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Vim, but I'm going to open up a Vim session. All right. Oh, I actually need to CD into my API. All right. Now I'm actually in the project. I can see my folders. And so yeah, I think that should be big enough. So I've got an API like set up as far as the folder structure, but I actually don't have any data. So with Rails, another reason why I chose Rails is because with Rails, with a couple commands, I could actually scaffold some data in there real quickly. I didn't mention what this API is actually going to be. It's going to be a movie database. So if you're familiar with IMDb, this site, IMDb actually has no public-facing API. Every API that you use, it's built by developers like you and me that don't work for IMDb. So that's kind of the reason why I kind of chose to do this. And I'm going to go ahead and build out a database that has a movie and also a rating. So I'm just going to start small. So I'm going to have movie titles and my ratings. I'm just going to set up, it's going to be MySQL SQL for the database if that matters to people. And I'm going to have to set up my database by running this command. This is all like Rails specific stuff. I know a lot of people aren't in the Rails at the moment, but just to get the database started. And then to start my server, I'm just going to type Rails server. Oops. Cool. So I've got the server running. I'm now going to go to localhost 3000 because that's where the sample, or Rails points at 3000. I'm not sure what Python does, but I'm pretty sure it's something similar or close. So now my Rails app. It's all good. But if I wanted to actually check out my data for movies, now see this little caret. Another thing to note, I make a note of it in somewhere in here. In the blog post, I note that normally your actual JSON doesn't look as pretty as this. So I'm actually using a Chrome plugin So when you view JSON view, when you view your JSON in browser, it actually pretty prints it and organizes it better. So this is the plugin I'm using. So if you end up going to the blog post after the fact and not noticing that your JSON, this looks like a bunch of garbage, I would download this plugin.
Thanks for that.
All right, somebody have a question, or do I need to slow down?
Oh no, I was gonna say thanks for that tidbit. Just so everyone knows, I'm going to also be collecting the links, and you'll see all of these links
Okay,
available. So don't rush to like, oh, I gotta download JSON Viewer
cool.
right now. Unless you're following along, then you might want to.
Yeah. All right, awesome. Another thing I'm going to do is going to be a more of a Rails hand wavy thing. And then, so I'm at this point, if you're following on the blog post, I'm at that point where it shows the empty thing. I'm also going to install another library that creates data for you on the fly. It's called Faker. This actual particular library is actually pretty common. Um, most other, I guess, frameworks also have, or even languages have something similar to Faker, where it just creates this data for you. So what I just did is I put it into the gem file, which is where you put all your Ruby gems and libraries that you want to include in your project. If you're curious, within the file tree, this is the inside of my app. Gem files right here. And if you don't have one, all you have to do is create one. And let me bundle install, which installs all the stuff. Again, this is all like Rails hand wavy stuff. We're not into like the actual building of the API yet. So if you aren't familiar with Rails, it's not that big of a deal if you don't know about that. So I hit bundle install. So now I want to create a seeds file. Normally, for testing purposes, I usually create fake data for my APIs, just because if you look at this, it's kind of hard to tell if your API is working. I mean, you could write tests for it, but it's nice to have like fake data to be able to like see stuff happening. Seeing like normally on a normal app, like if I go to Facebook, like you would normally see stuff, but I don't want to get to this point yet. I actually just want to start a basic API. So I'm gonna throw this block in here, which is some standard Ruby code. It's got I'm basically going to be creating a movie 20 times, and I'm just going to take a sample of these ratings, and then with the Faker gem, it's going to make up a name of the movie for me.
So
So
I
it's
have
going
I
to
have a question with that.
go ahead.
So using Faker, do you do that mostly to avoid hitting the what is it like some of the API limits? Because I know like that's one of the things when you like try to test GitHub or if you try to test certain websites, they'll hit you with like an API limit and you'll just sit there and test, and then all of a sudden your code will just stop working. I actually ran
Yeah.
into that issue web scraping before. It was like, yeah, no, you can't do that many times.
So yes and no. You wouldn't use Faker for that. So as far as like testing, um, Actually, actually, you could use Faker. I've never used Faker for that. I have come up with like, so I built an app. I built this app for let me see, diverse. Hopefully this works. I haven't built this up. I built this app that's built on an API. It's also an Ember app on the front end. It's not going to work. Hold on, I'll explain it while I find it. So basically, this app is basically to find diverse speakers in tech. Um, it's not public, and it was a project I was working on with Steamrolls that actually never came to fruition. Um, oh,
I
I
wish
know
that
where it
would
is.
have come to fruition. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome, but I just didn't. I ended up at the same time I was doing this, I moved out here to San Francisco, and I just couldn't balance a new project and also learn a new code base for work.
Yeah.
So I wasn't able to keep up with it. It actually took me longer. I had the thing done about like within a couple weeks, but it took me longer to polish it off, just because I didn't have time to go back and fix things. Oh, looks like DivShot was actually purchased by Firebase. Good to know. Oh, does that mean I can't access my application? It's a good question.
For those listening too, if you can find a Python variant to Faker, I've heard of them before. I just can't think of any off the top of my head. Please, please, just leave a comment in the YouTube chat or in the Google Plus chat.
Cool. Yeah, Project Voice. Um, what's it at? All right. So this is a project basically, and what I was doing is I was hitting the Twitter API, and I hit quite a few different limitations. It's actually not going to pull up for me. All right. Oh, here it is. Cool. So basically, this is like all the speakers. Um, I just kind of stole a lot of data from one of the specific women's conferences as far as my fake data. But the part that I'm actually stealing data from is Twitter information. So names, bios, I think. Yeah, so all the bio information I'm actually scraping from Twitter using the Twitter gem on the back end. And this
Hmm.
is a Rails API built with a JavaScript framework on top. So I've got two separate repos talking to each other, which is so my goal for this was actually to do it on Ember and then eventually try out React, which is that just came out. Well, it came out a year prior to this, but it didn't really get popular until like 6 months prior to actually making this. So that was my goal to be able to for this app. Um, Again, it's like very, very MVP state. I'm able to like search for different people and search and stuff like that. And this is more of like an Ember app, and since we're not talking about Ember, I won't get too much detail about it. But since you brought it up, yeah, I ended up writing some tests for this app, and I ended up instead of using the Faker gem, I actually used mocks. So I would
Okay.
mock the API out. So I would mock the status. There's some good gems in Ruby, like VCR, which
Yep.
is kind of falling out of popularity at this point. So I know Sam Sophis just rebuilt this entire gem in Swift, and you could actually have the same functionality in Swift. So I'm pretty sure people have ported this over to other different
Yeah, there's
things like
definitely
Python.
one in Python.
But yeah, I would recommend using this so that you don't have to hit the API multiple times, and you can just record that response the first time, and that's it. So as far as testing, that would be a good. But we won't go in that detail. We can talk about more of that once I get through this actual app.
All right.
Um, so cool. Back to the fake data. So basically, creating names and ratings. To run that file, I have a command already. Cool. So now, where's my localhost? If I refresh, I now have fake data. So I've got my names, I've got my ratings, and these are all just fake movie titles written in lorem ipsum, and I've got 20 of them. So I basically now at this point have an API, and I don't know, without the I guess back and forth going through Twitter and also my other app, I guess that would have took like about 5 minutes. But one thing that might not be something that we're looking to do is like right now we have like timestamps created at, updated at. Sometimes you want to format this data. My recommendation is not formatting like times and dates, just send them as raw as possible. And then wherever you're consuming the data, go ahead and like handle that on that end. So in Ember, I would use like some sort of time formatter based on that. But for the sake of this app, I don't want to send like updated at and created at. Actually, I want to create something which is a serializer. So in Rails and Ruby, you have access to this gem, which was still kind of been in a weird state. I've had to update this gem twice in my blog posts because it's been breaking on me. So hopefully this works today, because I didn't think far enough ahead to actually test this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a serializer, which if you think of a serializer as um, separate, so I have like folders where I didn't actually go into detail of this, but my model movie I created using the generator. I've got got those attributes. Actually, I just realized I didn't add any attributes, but regardless, so I've got my movie model, which has these attributes. Was it a movie and rating? For a serializer, you can actually choose. Oh, I don't have a folder. Oh, let me create the serializer so I can explain this first. So again, I'm using a generator, some Rails magic to create the file structure in the folder. So now I have a folder, oops, here, in my serials folder, and I've got a movie serializer. So I've got the ID, title, and rating. So now that I have a serializer, and Rails knows that I have a serializer, what's going to happen is some data is going to disappear. Actually, start this. I'm pretty sure I needed to restart my server to make that work. So let's see. Cool. So yeah, restarting the server actually updates the serializer. And now you notice that a couple things. I no longer have the updated and created at because I don't have updated and created at in my serializer. If I add that, oops. Actually, what is it called? Oh, I'm missing a D. Cool. So now I have updated because I now with my serializer, it's kind of like whitelisting. If you're familiar with like whitelisting, blacklisting, like different websites, I'm able to whitelist different attributes in the serial from the serializer. So that's what's going on right there. So if I do want to do updated at, I'll leave that in there. I am noticing that rating is null, so I'm not sure why. So just having the attribute. Oh, okay, maybe it's oh, because movie's not an attribute. That's why title is an attribute. Cool. And I actually want to do attribute reader. Well, I'll just take that out. I don't really need that for the sake of this demonstration. I'll deal with that later. So yeah, I'm able to whitelist different attributes here. So let's say let me go back to this and see what my next thing is. So yeah, so I'm pretty much matching this. This is where I talk about updated and created at. So now I want to add a new attribute. So going back to movies. And I'll just, oh, I see what I did wrong. I was abbreviating an attribute, but I'll just copy and paste for the sake of this. Cool. So what I did is I wanted to, for my movies, I want to add a director. So I just did that. And since I didn't have the luxury of adding it to my fake seed data, I'm creating a director on the fly, which is not a good thing to do because the director name is going to change every time I update the data or refresh the data. But for the sake of the demonstration, I'll show you how this works. So I'm creating a new attribute called director. I added it at the end. I now need to go back to my serializer and add a director, and we will see this work. Won't see it work because I added a period. Do. Oh, you know what? I don't want this in my models. I actually want this in my serializer. Cool. Spell director wrong. Sorry. I'm gonna start and stop my server. Maybe that's it. Oh, that's what it is. Sorry, I don't actually have directors on my model, so I don't need this here. This is so if you look at, I just go here. Sorry, I open up the console. I've never done any Django work, so I'm not sure what if you guys have a IRB like this. Oop, something's broken. All right, I won't do that. The pain of live coding. So if you look at, I've got on my original model, I created an ID, a title, and a rating. I never actually added director to my schema. That's what my issue is. I'm just explaining this for those following along. I don't have director on my schema. I have title and rating, but I still want to have. I don't want to go back and update my data. This is something I'm just going to be changing on the fly anyway, which is why director is not a good example. But though, for the sake of movies, like I guess you could have had like a date created or something like that, or did some sort of calculation. You can have a method on your serializer, but regardless, I had to remove director from my model, and in my serializer, I'm only adding director, which now should work. Define method attributes. Hmm. Something's broken.
Ricardo just pointed out just a pro tip for those guys that struggle with IRB. You could check out Wrapup.
Okay, cool. I'm actually getting ready to do a Django tutorial to beef up my Python pretty soon. So hopefully I'll be just as good as Ruby in Python in a few months.
We'll have to look at the part two of this then.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually so I built APIs in Go. I built APIs in JavaScript and Ruby, and I haven't done anything in Python. I've actually done very little in Python other than taking a college class on it. That's about it, and that's the extent of my college programming was one class in Python. That was it. So I fixed what was broken. I didn't need to actually add attributes because I'm not doing anything with those yet because we haven't really gotten to testing. I'm not sure I'm going to get that far, um, but I'll do some hand waving for testing when I get there. So yeah, this is my director. I just added a new attribute on the serializer, and now it's showing directors. Yep. And that's the problem I was talking about. Your directory is going to change every time you hit the serializer. It's going to create a new name. So you actually want to actually put that on your model. But for the sake of an example, I just do it in the serializer just to show you how that works. So if I wanted to do like the wouldn't be something that would be in IMDb, but for the sake of example, I'm gonna How do you how to do random numbers in Ruby? Uh, oh, okay, cool. Give me a number random for 100. So now I have views, and that's going to change every single time. So you can do like calculations on the fly, something like if you wanted to do like names or titles. So if you want to do like uppercase title, you can do all on fly in the serializer. So you take like uh, object that title split. Actually, object that title dot. Wow, I don't remember my basic standard library Ruby. Save that. Break. What happened? Oh, so yeah, I basically made a really quick mistake too. So I added this method uppercase case title, but it's not showing up here, and it's because I didn't add it to my whitelisted attributes. So if it's not up here, it won't show. And as far as, let's get that method right, to upper upcase. Okay. Yep. So now I have my titles upcased. So like something, this would be more of a realistic idea, something you would want to do on the fly in a serializer, not actually making up random data, but actually being able to manipulate data on the fly. So if you don't want a title, let's say if you want an abbreviated title, so if you just want to do some sort of method that would only take initials, so if you only want like MC for your movie title, then you can do that. Or if you wanted to have like abbreviations for directors just by their last names, you can actually just take the last string within the string, or the last name within the string. So stuff like that. So that's basically the serializer in a nutshell. I'll go ahead and move on from that, which actually brings us to the very end. So I'll do some hand waving as far as like talking about things that you want to think about as far as APIs. So for one, you want to think about um, authentication for your API. So as this API stands, the way the Rails API gem works, you would not be able to use this in any app. And that's because in Rails, they automatically out of the box, they prevent you from doing cross-site, whatever core stands for, I forget what it was. But you can't actually access an app unless you enable cores, which prevents like SQL injection and cross-site scripting and stuff like that. So like one of the biggest issues, like back in the 90s when you had sites that were built on basic HTML and that would send Perl scripts. So if you think like Amazon, if you wanted to place an order on Amazon back in the 90s when they first came out, you're able to go to Amazon.com, find an item you were looking for, and you can just open up the web console. And if you found like an item, you could actually item.price and change the price to a penny. And that was like a huge problem back in the day. So to prevent things like that, out of the box, most libraries and frameworks prevent that, and able to enable that for on a case-by-case basis. Rails has this plugin called Rat Cores that you enable this way, and that way you can actually have access to it. So for my example of my Ember app, in order to talk to my API, I had to enable that so that way I can actually get the data and manipulate it on the front end and send that data. That data changes back to the back end and actually manipulate the database. So that's something to think about. You want to think about, that's a security thing that's very important. So like whatever language you choose to write your API in, yeah, you want to think about that. And also authentication. I give a little shout out to NocGem that actually does authentication. So for example, like with users, so GitHub, I have like I won't show it, but I have a actual auth token for GitHub. that so GitHub knows that whenever I log in, that's me. So another thing to think about if you want logins on your app, and let's say you use Twitter on your iPhone and you use Twitter on the web, and you have the same login. So Twitter has a backend that knows wherever you log in that you're you, and it's not just based on the username, it's actually based on the auth token. So that's another thing to look at. That's what the knock gem helps you out with. And let's look at testing really quick too. And then if you guys have any questions, let me know. After this point, I'm basically done. So for testing, I won't write any test. I do have some tests written on my diversified app that I have. So if you go to github.com/steamroll, hopefully Jay will capture that link, but /steamroll. They got a couple apps on there. One's the client, which is the Ember app. But if you go back to Steamroll and you check out the API, you can actually see a lot of the stuff that I actually had to figure out as far as the API. So I can't remember if I have tests written here, but we'll check. Yeah, so I do have simple tests that validate the presence, certain things. So if I were to, whenever I hit the API from my Ember app, going back to, and these are separate apps. So if I want to talk to my API, I send data back to my API. I have validations that check this to make sure there's emails. I have validation to check to see if the email is unique. So no other email can be repeated in my database. And I also have the validation for the password. So you can't actually access my data without a password. And then I've got some other super simple tests because I didn't actually spend that much time on this app. Looks like I'm not using VCR here. I'm actually hitting, I don't think this test actually works. Yeah, this test actually doesn't actually work. I went through a whole process of mocking that, and I think I deleted it. But I was mocking the API to test that this specific Twitter handle had this specific image, which is not a very good test. But we won't go into details about that. That was just me, kind of this bike shedding and yak shaving something. So yeah, check that out if you want to look into that API. I also recommend if you do Python, interested to see their approach to building APIs because everybody's got slightly different, but at the end of the day, it all works. So I guess you can build pretty simple. I know Flask is pretty simple framework. You can build an API with it.
That's Flask is my go-to.
Yeah, it's pretty lightweight. I enjoy Flask is pretty comparable to Express on JavaScript. I like it. I usually go to Express first before I even touch Ruby if I want to do something super quick. I guess the equivalent to Flask in Ruby would be Sinatra.
Yeah,
you can also do you can also do a very simple API in Sinatra. But for the sake of writing an API in 5 minutes and talking about it, the Rails API was super fast. And it leaves out all the extra stuff in Rails. So with my API, I don't have templates. I don't have any HTML in here. I do have an option to do mailers that's already set up out of the box. And I do have controllers. I'm going to actually look into that for you guys. But this is a controller, and this is how I'm actually presenting the JSON in the browser. So, and it automatically goes to movies.json. So that's why it's rendering JSON automatically. But cool. That's it. Does anybody have any questions?
You mentioned a lot of good reasons why to use an API, but can you think of any that, why you may not want to use an API for something?
I guess maybe not. Do you want to go down the path of doing API if you want to do a prototype and you want to do it quick, and you have a framework like Rails that can do everything front to back for you. You can go ahead and go that approach. But to be honest, at this point, I think all new apps should be started and thought out. How are you going to access and make some sort of public-facing API with your app? I work at a company block, and we're actually going through that problem right now. Well, it's not even a problem because we already had a half-built API, so we're actually building the rest of the API out now as we're adding new features to the app. And for the simple reason of there's basically a new JavaScript framework that happens like every 6 months that's coming out. If you want to have access and have the flexibility to move from, let's say, Angular to an Ember or to a React or a Backbone, you have that flexibility just to inject JavaScript on top of your API and then present that in the web. Also, for the same reason, if you want to have that sort of the layer over your actual database to be able to use that same database within a Swift app or iOS app or whatever, or Android app, you have access to that same data that's presented here. So, for example, I've got some Swift apps that I use. So I use Alamo Fire. So within Swift, all I have to do is pass in, install this CocoaPod, and this is very iOS specific, so if this doesn't make sense to you, it's fine. But I install this CocoaPod, and then I pass in my URL to my API here. And that's it. Now I have access to all my data of the app I just built by passing this in, and I can make some manipulations to the data. As long as I enable that what I mentioned, the cross-site scripting, to be able to save and persist data and have like the proper API tokens, I'm able to make a Swift app. And I've done that. I built I built an Instagram clone, all based on the Instagram API that's open. So, and that's the app. It's not public. You can't really download it. It was a side project for me. But I basically rebuilt Instagram by using their API. So, and to be able to have that flexibility is definitely far outweighs the amount of time it's going to take to learn how to do an API if it's your first foray into it. So hopefully that answered your question.
Definitely. So I mean, it sounds like if you're starting out with a project, I think you even said it in your answer. You should be thinking about how can I make this into an API? How am I going to make it easier for people to access my data? Which is actually interesting because I think that's kind of that open development mindset where for us we're like, yeah, have people getting the data, have people getting the information, and then you get like these giant companies that are like Twitter, for instance, where it's like, no, don't take our data, don't do anything.
Yeah, Netflix is another example that there's no public. They turned off their API 3 years ago, and which is it stinks because you have to steal their data basically if you want to build a Netflix, some sort of Netflix helper. But yeah, some companies don't believe in it, and some companies do. So it's just interesting. Facebook's a very good example, though, of the opposite end of the spectrum, where they open their API to everybody. And that's why you see Facebook logins on every app.
Yep. Well, nice.
Cool.
I appreciate the information. Anytime we get towards Rails, I'm just like, uh-oh, like it's very, very scary territory for me. But at the same time, I think getting more information from using Faker and some of the other tools that you brought up, I never thought about like actually rendering your JSON and then so you can actually present it in HTML. And normally I just like say, oh, here's my HTML data.
Yeah, and I did JSON. You could do XML if that's your thing. I know XML is a little bit more popular in the .NET world, I think. Maybe not so much now. But yeah, you could definitely use XML as another sort of API rendering. But JSON's pretty popular in my circle of friends, so that's why it's my go-to. I put up my Twitter too. If you guys want to follow me, I tweet about. I've been tweeting about some Swift stuff because that's what I've kind of been most newbie in. So that's what my learning's been at the moment. I'm building a chat app that you can have quotes from Kanye sent to you. So that's
you can share in some of his quote unquote genius.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. I have to jump off and take care of my son, so I won't be able to stick around and chat.
All right. Well, everybody, thank you once again for jumping into Code Newbie, and I think we did have one more question from Mo. He said, in terms of performance, how would a normal Rails site exposed through the browser compare to a site exposed through JSON?
Uh, so performance is like very interesting. Like Rails gets a lot of knocks on performance just because the way people approach their apps aren't in the mindset of performance. Rails is if you think of performance and speed of building the app, Rails leans more on the speed of building the app. So performance usually isn't usually top um, mindset when you approach that. But as far as performance, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to make your Rails app a lot faster. But for the simple, like, if you're thinking about performance, I think you might want to lean more towards an API. You could do that with Rails by rendering JSON and just using Rails as your abstraction over your data layer, so over your SQL or Postgres database, and that will help increase uh, speed per se. But yeah, hands down, having an API over a Rails API over having a general Rails app is going to be faster in the long run. You'll have more flexibility just because your API is super dumb. It has no idea about other things as far as like views and HTML and templates. It's just pushing data to you as fast as possible.
Hmm. I think like Ricardo kind of worded with that too, saying the Rails API is much leaner because the middleware stack is shorter, so there's actually less
Yeah,
code running.
exactly. Yep. Yeah, like I showed you, all the extra stuff that comes in Rails is all not here.
Nice.
It's out of the box.
We did have another question if you have time.
Yeah, that'd be the last one.
So Kevin asked when a Rails 5, well, when is Rails 5 coming out? And if you're just using normal Rails, do you have to take any extra steps?
If you're using normal Rails and you already have a Rails app, no, you don't need to take any extra steps. All you have to do is start thinking about how you can install. One, you want to start instead of um, relying on your actual templates, you want to start rendering JSON. So that way you have these get movies.json calls, and you can actually see your data rendered in JSON just by doing this right here. And you can do that today in a Rails app.
Okay.
Also, the active mono serializer gem that I showed very briefly in the beginning, that's also available. It's a gem. You just add it on top of your Rails app, and you can start presenting serializers for your JSON. Um,
So more than anything, it just seems like they're taking some of that functionality and just making it I guess a standard in
yeah,
Rails 5 or okay.
yeah. This is built in the Rails 5. All this stuff in Rails API, that whole gem is built in the box with Rails 5. So when I first started, I actually did like Rails dash API instead of in Rails 5. It's going to look like this. So that's literally it. You just move a hyphen. Actually, no, it's actually one less hyphen. So in Rails 5, once you have that installed, all you have to do is Rails dash API new, and that's it.
Okay. Cool,
So
cool.
there's a lot of as far as when it's coming out, I have no idea. It's a process. I think their goal was probably before the end of the year, but we'll see. I know Rails 4 came out 2 years ago around this time of the year. So cool.
Well, all right.
Okay.
Well, definitely thank you so much, Brian. And once again, I just want to thank Code Newbie for allowing us to do this. If you're a Code Newbie yourself, or if you are an experienced developer that just wants to learn a little bit more, I definitely encourage you to take advantage of Code Newbie. We have a lot of things going on for every language in mind, from Ruby to JavaScript, Python, Go, and we even have some front-end devs in there as well to make it all fun. So with that said, everybody say goodbye.
All right. See you guys.
Take care.